Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the Bravehearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them. Hi, Janelle.
Hey, Andrea. We have another one of our Braveheart conversations. We've been doing a lot of these lately.
We have. You are listening to Permission to be Human, and we love giving Bravehearts permission every month. Today, we're going to talk about permission to do your own thing, addressing your purpose. We'll talk a little bit about love languages. How do I get intimacy without sex? Which I thought was a really great question. Some people asked about finding the balance between having your own interests and balancing family and parenting and marriage. A little bit about menopause, a little bit about poly, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So,
and just a reminder that these in real life conversations and online are happening on a monthly basis. And so if you've got questions about anything that you want to like open up to others, then this is a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig in.
Yeah. First question. What is a good mix of independent interests while balancing a relationship and parenting?
Yeah. I would say, so no right balance, right? Things are almost never in balance. But it's different for everyone. But in my experience, and with so many women I've known, there's just so much guilt and obligation about that giving piece. Like, oh, I have to do this. Like, I'm sacrificing and I have to put my child first. I have to put my husband first. I have to put the family first. And that's all well and good because you love those people and you love your entity. But it seems that our independent interests do take a back seat often. And my golden rule is that if your outside interests make you more present and feel more nourished for the time you have with your family, then they are a good thing. If you are distracted by them when you were with your family, well, then no. A few things I did early on that were considered rogue, I would say, by the other parents in my community was that I visited a local Airbnb every once in a while, just like 3 blocks away. And I stayed there for 48 hours. And those 48 hours felt like fucking 120 hours. Like, I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my God, it's only 1. like I still have hours. And so that was amazing. And I think at the time when I told people I was doing that, I was like, this is really nourishing for me. You should try it. Most people said, oh my God, my husband would burn the house down. Oh my God, I couldn't stand to be away from my kids that long. Oh my gosh, I could just, it's just too much time for me. And, this is being a Braveheart, right? It's just like, it's slightly uncomfortable in the beginning because most people don't do it. You're not used to doing that.
Yeah. And it's uncomfortable, I think, taking time for yourself, right? When you're like, oh, this is supposed to feel good, and actually feeling good can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. That is so true. And this came up recently for me when I was working with someone with people pleasing, a client. And I was like, okay, so how did it feel to like choose yourself and disappoint, and have to say no? And she's like, it feels like shit, right? She's like, I don't feel good at all. I was like, oh yeah, that's what happens. It's uncomfortable. So something else I did was I joined a choir because I love to sing, and it is like my favorite thing in the world. I think I could say that. Like, I get so much happiness and pleasure out of this choir, and I go and I just feel more buoyant and more happy and more like everything's going to be okay when I come home. I have a friend whose mom would go to a movie every Saturday morning when she was little. She's like, in her 30s now. And I remember her telling me that and thinking, this was years ago. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. My mom certainly never went to a movie.
By herself.
Yeah, by herself. And I was like, that's so great. She's like, I don't really know. When I was little, I didn't really think much of it. She's like, that's what she did on Saturdays. And I would do something with my dad at home. And I was like, good for her, right? Like, she was ahead of her time. And I think one benefit of the polyamory was that I would get to leave town like once a month. And so I would have these like 3 days off. And I would just come back most often feeling rejuvenated, nourished, like I attuned to myself and my energy so that I could come back refreshed for my family. So yeah, it doesn't have to be 3 days. It can be like 2 hours.
Right. It can be like a movie. And so one thing I just want to jump in here with balance. It's, you started out with the question was around balancing, and you've mentioned this. We've talked about this. There is a false assumption that balance means everything in every moment is in balance.
Yes, totally.
And really what we're saying is that they're never in balance. Sometimes you're taking care of yourself. Sometimes you're taking care of your family, right? But that the overarching feeling you're going for is one of balance, but not that things look like they're in balance in that moment.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I absolutely. I totally agree. And I remember thinking, someone pointed this out to me maybe 10 years ago, and I thought, yeah, balance is actually like
it's a false illusion.
It's an illusion. It's an illusion. And so something else I've mentioned in the past is this idea of the oxygen masks that we all know, right, from the plane. And they used to say, like, put your oxygen mask on before helping others. And even then I thought, my mom is definitely going to be helping me first. I didn't get it. Like, I did not get it. And now I think it's even worse of a metaphor, because it actually is saying to do that. And the primary time we think of it is in an emergency situation when you're on a plane. And really, you should be doing it every day.
Right.
Every day you should be putting your oxygen mask on first, whether that's taking a 5-minute meditation in the morning or a walk or having your special tea in your special mug, or
I love that.
Like, it's an everyday thing, not an emergency thing. So just think about that.
Yeah. So good. Wise advice from a wise mama.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in general, my overall advice would be, most people I see and talk to, whatever you're doing, you could probably do a little more of it. In addition, you are modeling that you are taking time for yourself, for your child. And I do believe, because I took time alone, that my child now knows to prioritize her own downtime. Or at least I think it was, I had some influence in that.
Beautiful. Okay, so the next question is, what are your tips for balancing different love languages? So for those who don't know, Bravehearts, the 5 love languages, and this is by the Gottmans?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay. Are acts of service, and not everyone like subscribes to this. So this is just like a concept, like based on their research of talking to Christian-based couples. I will name that.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay, it is a Christian root.
Yes. I learned that from We Can Do Hard Things. So even the names of these things. So there's just a grain of salt whenever we're hearing anything. But I think that there's a general there's a message that's here that is useful, which is why we're bringing it up.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the 5 love languages are acts of service, physical touch, words of affirmation, gifts, and quality time. Yeah. And so recognizing, of course, that it's super common that 2 people have their different top love language. And the idea, of course, being that all of us probably have all of these at some point or another, but that the idea that one of these love languages is how we feel the most nourished or the most received or the most seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, my top 2 are touch and quality time.
Physical touch. And boy, it's actually hard to choose. Like, I definitely...
It's just one is usually it's just one that's dominant.
Yeah. I mean, physical touch is definitely really high, for sure. Yeah, but I feel like I do get nourished from the 4 out of 5 of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I would say, so when you're balancing 2 different ones, meaning that like, so in my case, when I was with my partner, like we actually both had touch and quality time. We're both, so that in a way was easier. You can say that, but it's still the learning that I had. And here's an example of how they can be beneficial is that when having hard conversations, I wanted to be touched, that we were holding hands, right? Like there was some physical connection helped me stay in my body so that I could listen to what he was saying. When we were not touching, I felt very ungrounded. So that's maybe just an example of how it can be used. But I have other friends, right, where one's love language was physical touch and the other one, I'm actually not 100% sure, but I think it was acts of service. And so it was really hard for her to remember to give him touch because he just like back rubs, right, holding hands in public. And not anything to do about like PDA as much as just like the touching. She actually kind of had an aversion to being touched. So she had to really make an effort to touch. And so as you can imagine, like, they've been married for 25, 30 years, like in a really loving relationship, but they have to, this is a conscious, I'm showing up for you in this way that you want when it's not obvious to me.
Beautiful. Yeah. There's even something new to take away from me.
And so if you do have differences, then how do you navigate that? One, I would say, is to give yourself reminders, right? And know that you likely need to be resourced at a time when, if you're going to be giving them something that they need, if it's not obvious for you. Right? So in that example of my friend, right? Like, if she was like exhausted from her day, wanting to like hold space for her husband with touch was harder for her. And it actually comes back to just holding space in general. You can almost think of it that way. I'm just riffing off of this right now. But if you're giving from a love language that's not yours innately, that do you have the capacity for it? And how can you be resourced enough to do it?
An important question. And I would say that the biggest thing that it bumps up against for me is just as you said that is talking to people who have 3 kids and have a busy household, and is that you don't really take time because you don't have the time, you feel like, to set up the container well. Like sitting in a room, lighting a candle, shutting the door, adding music during a conversation, for that love language when you're communicating, touching, however the love languages look for you. And so I just want to encourage, like, just take 2 minutes to make sure that the person's resourced, that you're remembering what love language they like, that, just setting up that time when you're communicating just goes a long way. But I, for years, just like, there's not time for that.
Right.
And I didn't do it. And then when I did, I was just like, oh my God, this makes such a huge difference. So.
And just to give another example, right, is if someone's love language is acts of service, and an obvious one is like, could you unload the dishwasher for them?
Right.
Like that energy, that 5 minutes can give them an hour, say, of energy in a way. Because they feel so seen, they feel so appreciated.
Totally. Yeah, that's so true.
Okay, next question. Currently, the only intimacy in my marriage is centered around sex. How do I discuss creating more intimacy without sex in my marriage?
Yeah, such a great question. And I think the first thing I thought of was just changing up your communication style. Just really thinking out, like, just a little bit outside the box. We really just get stuck in our ruts and our habits. Maybe you leave a note on the mirror for your partner, or maybe you send them an email, or maybe you send them a funny or interesting text or loving text, or maybe you greet them at the door with a hug. I started using way more emojis at some point just to be silly and playful, right? And that just brings like a little lightness and smile back to the relationship. But I think ultimately what this comes down to is summoning the courage. I remember there's some quote in a great movie called The Last Waltz, and it's about marriage, and it's about, she's like, it takes a lot of courage to approach your husband for sex. And it does. And it feels like it shouldn't. It feels like, it's like, oh, why is this hard for me? He's my husband. I see him all the time. And yet it does take courage because you're putting yourself like in a more vulnerable position. And so I would say like summon the courage, not to ask for sex, but just go in for a hug when he's not expecting it. And it's going to be a little vulnerable for you if you're not used to hugging all the time.
This comes back to like what I'm a huge advocate for, and like my mission here in the world is just that actually there is education and skills around pleasure and intimacy that we do not learn in our culture that can be learned, right? And how to have conversations about intimacy is a skill. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that you just named, like, asking for what you want is hard and vulnerable.
Yeah.
But also taking a step back farther from that is defining terms. What does intimacy mean to you? Right? What does sex mean to you?
Right.
And
yeah.
Like, and what does it mean to your partner?
Right.
Because intimacy is a big term, and it might mean different things to you. Like you just mentioned the word hug. Does intimacy for her mean hugging? Does it mean that for him? For some people, intimacy is sitting on the couch next to each other, watching a movie, not talking. For someone else, they feel really disconnected in that moment. And so understanding what each of you mean when you say the word intimacy, and then can you give examples of when something feels intimate to you that feels good? Because I find the examples are very useful in understanding, oh, that's what you meant? I didn't understand that's what you meant.
It's amazing how we just get egocentric and we're just like, well, this means this, doesn't it? And then your partner can say something completely different.
Yes.
And neither is right or wrong. It's just different interpretations based on our cultural conditioning and our family and what we've been through and what we consider and our past experiences.
Right. So that would probably be, I would even maybe start with that. If you want something that you're not getting, is to say, let's set up a meeting a conversation just to talk about what these words mean and examples of when I did get them.
Yeah. And I think for some people, that's going to be even harder than going in for the hug. So think about what is what's less awkward or vulnerable for you, and embrace the awkwardness, as I think you said recently. You're like, it's going to be awkward.
Right.
Because you're not used to talking about intimacy.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Okay, next question has to do with purpose. And how do I find my purpose, and how do I start that self-inquiry?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of self-care out there, about self-care advice, about journaling, about taking a bath, about taking me time. But ultimately, I would say the best way that I learned to go inward was spending time alone without input. Like, hands down. Even if it's just 10 minutes, like sitting on the porch, no phone, no dog, no child,
no music,
no conversation, no neighbor talk, nothing, because it's uncomfortable. Like in our society, we don't do that a lot, and a lot of our institutions and structures of life don't support it. So start there. Start by being alone.
I love that. Something that I'm doing actually right now is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's been around for 30 years. And one of the point of it is called The Spiritual Guide to Higher Creativity, I think is the tagline for it. She gives tools to unblock your creativity and to allow essentially life force, God force, source energy to move through you. And the tools, she's got 2 different tools that she recommends. One is the morning pages, where you're writing longhand for 3 pages every morning when you first get up. And the whole idea of that isn't that that's your life's work. It's just that you're removing any blocks or just whatever thoughts are in your mind. You're just allowing movement of this energy from your mind through your hand onto the page. And I realized I hadn't even heard about The Artist's Way until a couple months ago, but that is what I recognized when I was journaling for years. That's how I looked at it. I was like, oh, I have so many thoughts running through my head that for them to siphon from my brain, through my arm, out the pen, onto the page, it just somehow was a process of filtering.
It's clearing the channel. It's clearing the channel because we have so much gunk in there.
Yeah.
It's not all bad stuff, but it is life swarming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. So The other thing I talk about with purpose in my keynote is, the title of it is Forget Your Purpose and Give Yourself Permission, right? So purpose has become this, it's just like another box to check. It's become an achievement. It's become something we have to find. We better find it. There's so much pressure. Oh my gosh, what's your purpose in life? And I really feel like a better place to start is permission, is going inward and saying, what do I love? Do I love cake? Do I love ice skating? Do I love penguins? Do I love, it can be anything, but there might be something for your childhood that you have always loved, but were told was impractical, was too expensive, didn't make sense in life, couldn't make you money. And I'm not saying to change your job and become, a professional ice skater. I'm saying just move toward that in some small way. Mm-hmm. And when you give yourself permission in a small way, it leads to bigger ways. Mm-hmm. That's what happened to me. Purpose is also really future oriented. Something, again, I heard Liz Gilbert say, it's really so much about what am I going to do? What's going to happen to me? How am I going to change the world? And for me, permission is right now. What can I give myself permission to do right now? As I was running yesterday, I noticed there was these beautiful piles of leaves, that are red and yellow, and I had the urge to go jump in the pile of leaves, but I didn't do it. It just felt a little too edgy, right? It was somebody else's yard, whatever. I'm sure they wouldn't have cared, but I think there is a natural barrier in our society to doing this because it feels out of place, a little embarrassing, a little vulnerable. And so, but what can you do today when you think of it in the moment? What can you give yourself permission to do? I remember my mom was with my cousin when it was many, many years ago. And my cousin was visiting and we were driving along the road and we saw some kind of a cowboy hat in the road. And my mom pulled over and she ran over and got it. We brought it in the car and, it was just a funny memory. But then when my cousin became a mom, she was like, I want to be a mom like you, Donna, because you just you just pulled over in the middle of that road and grabbed that hat out of the road. And it was such a fun thing to do. And she was like, that's the kind of mom I want to be. And that ultimately is just this kind of permission, right? Just permission to be playful, permission to go off script, permission to do things that are not in the plan. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've really strived to be that kind of mom too. Just keep giving yourself permission.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. And I love that equation based on our last episode, which we just did, about what we don't want to be talking about. We don't want to be talking about the future. So if purpose is so future oriented and the presence is permission, obviously the present is going to ultimately lead to the future.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yay.
On its own. Okay. So interestingly, the next question has to do with permission. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with people having judgment about your non-traditional choices, as in the school you chose for your kid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is definitely a challenge. This takes a lot of practice. It's helpful to have a partner so you can have a united front. But the bottom line is that it's hard. It's hard when people in our life don't understand our choices. And my family does not understand all of my choices. I don't know if they ever will, but they still love me and I still love them. I definitely had people in my family who were against my daughter going to an alternative school.
Which is Waldorf.
Yes, which is Waldorf. And someone, in my family offered to pay me to send her to a Catholic school, which of course we were definitely not doing. Not of course, but for me, that would not have been right. And we knew it was the right thing for us. And we just suffered in judgment, right? And eventually it was forgotten and she got over it. And
especially because your kid was great and obviously didn't seem like she was being harmed.
Of course, and many years later, she was like, "Oh, I see why this was such a good school for her." We knew what was best. It was our child, and my heart goes out to you just in compassion because it is hard to be that pioneer, to do things different. I would also encourage you to find a support group, find other people who get it.
Other Bravehearts.
Yeah, other Bravehearts.
Yeah, and my suggestion on this is just waiting till you are what we call in your radiance before telling family members about unconventional decisions. If your radiance means in your radiance means that you are settled, you're sure of yourself, you're confident that what you're doing is correct for you, for your family, for your child, even if you don't know the outcomes. And you can stand in the strength and truth of that conviction when you're telling someone else. And in my experience, when I've done that, people have a hard time refuting or arguing with what I'm doing because they just see, they're like, okay, well, I don't agree with what you're doing, but clearly it's working for you because you're in such joy and in such radiance. So if you can get to, and that may mean that you have to wait to tell them until you get there. Not every decision means you're starting out in your radiance. It took me years to feel in my radiance regarding being poly.
Same. So hard in the beginning. And some people probably shouldn't ever know because they cannot receive it. And that can be challenging, but you really have to discern, like, who can receive this news and when can I do it in my radiance? Beautiful.
So the next question was related, which was, I don't want to feel guilty about having my kid miss school to shadow at a different school.
And this is just one of those classic permission things where I just learned at some point not to follow the rules. Like, I didn't have to follow the rules. Permission to do it your way. I mean, this is the heart of our podcast. I definitely used to be a big rule follower. And at some point, I mean, I can distinctly remember some small instance where I was like, wait, what if I don't do that? What's going to happen? Oh, nothing. Fucking nothing. Like, what if I show up to the thing without my ticket? You know, I mean, like, okay, not a Taylor Swift concert, but like, you know, some small thing. Like, what are they really going to not let me in? Like, most often that is not the case.
And of course, I'm thinking about your daughter wearing, what was it, like Santa Claus at Easter?
Santa Claus pajamas to an Easter egg hunt? Yeah. I mean, just like, oh, what's going to happen? Basically, people are going to look at me. I was afraid people were going to look at me and be like, she's not even trying. Like, and I'm like, whatever. Like, who cares? Like, it just doesn't matter. But even just like small things like following the rules on. I remember one of my fellow parents, like, I used to always read all of the school emails, right? And I really like follow them to a T. And then there was a time when I just stopped doing that. And she noticed. She was just like, oh, you don't know what's going on anymore. When I ask you, you don't know. And I was like, yeah, I'll find out when I get there. Like, it just seems like a waste of my time. Like, I get the gist, right? And plus, you're reading it, so I'll just call you and ask. Like, there's always someone who is paying attention. And obviously, we have to be discerning about, you know, when to follow rules and when not to. But anyway, just a little rant about that. Okay, judgment. Little note on judgment. Ultimately, I knew long ago I figured out long ago that my own judgment was what was fueling my worry about the judgment from others. If you just follow that, you're definitely going to, like, things are going to get better.
If you notice when you're judging yourself.
Yeah, because that's where it all starts. Like, that's where you're like, you're judging yourself and you're judging others too.
Right. But where is the judgment coming from? Is the judgment of yourself coming from your own heart? Or is the judgment of yourself coming from what someone told you should or shouldn't be doing?
Yeah. It's just a really messy circle. Next question.
Okay. Are extra romantic physical relationships worth the communication effort?
They were for me. That's why we started the podcast originally. They were the beginning of my personal growth, the beginning of finding myself. They made me appreciate my partner more. They helped me break out of my cage of culture and conditioning. They provided me with great pleasure. I fell in love with my body. I would recommend getting a poly therapist immediately if this is something you want to pursue, because you are going to need some support. There's definitely a lot to navigate. And luckily, Janelle is a poly coach. And she does that right now. I mean, I can also recommend a polyamorous therapist. And I would also listen to our poly how-to episode that really goes into the nitty-gritty from the beginning of dating others when you're in a committed relationship, and just lots of preventive measures that are going to, like, rules of the road that are going to help you along that journey. Yeah.
And my response is actually going to be maybe counterintuitive, which is in my experience, polyamory was absolutely one of my catalysts of my personal growth and becoming, but it was not about, as it turned out, someone else. Polyamory helped me understand myself better. It helped me discern what it was that I wanted. It helped me ask for it. And so in the end, like not knowing, right? Like here's the description, marriage, monogamous, and then going off script meant I had a lot of self-inquiry that I had to figure out. By allowing other people into my world meant, well, which people do I want? What is it?
Yes.
Who is it?
So crazy.
That is, bringing me joy and all that. So the irony is that for me, polyamory was actually about a relationship with myself.
8 years ago is when all that started. And yet, 6 months ago, I started getting on the dating apps again and doing a bunch of dating. And that also ended up being not at all about the guys. I mean, went on 22 dates in 6 weeks. And it was, I got nothing. I did not get any kind of a guy out of it. No boyfriend, no relationship, nothing. In fact, I just practiced being in my radiance and with practicing my boundaries and knowing who I am and knowing what I want, knowing what I don't want. So sometimes it's just about
so
you.
it's still a worthwhile experience for you. But
Absolutely.
The outcome wasn't what you were expecting.
No, it's all about going inside. Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one. I'd like to learn more about open relationships versus polyamory. What is the difference, and how does someone start that conversation?
Yeah, and I think that this is somewhat a matter of preference. I feel like polyamorous is the word that resonated most with me when we started it. Some people call this open. Some people think of open as being more sexual. Some people think of poly as being more sexual. There is no one way to do polyamory. And starting that conversation certainly isn't for the faint of heart, but I do think that starting out with a lot of I statements, which is is it NVOC? Did you say it the other day instead of NVC? Nonviolent communication?
Nonviolent communication. It's NVC.
Oh, I thought you said NVOC the other day. And I thought, I'm like, oh, I have it wrong. Okay. NVC is a great communication tool for starting these conversations, because it really teaches you to go inside and say, I feel this way, rather than saying, you're doing this wrong, or I don't like the way, you're touching me, or whatever. I would also say setting time aside, speaking back to back, really helpful for me, because I really react to other people's facial expressions, and I have big facial expressions. As Janelle mentioned earlier, like having touch during that conversation, really important.
If that works for you.
Yeah. And yes. Whatever your love language is, attune to it, and taking things slow, like starting small. Curiosity is a great place to start.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. With curiosity. And obviously researching.
Yeah.
Like there's resources. The book that I started with was Opening Up by Tristan Taormino. And one of the catchphrases in there that really resonated with me was, you move at the speed of the slowest person.
Yeah. Remember that.
But I would differentiate something that you said, which was, to me, an open relationship is the bigger umbrella term, and that polyamory is a subset of open relationship. And we get that there's a whole vocabulary out here: ethical non-monogamy, open relationship,
of course, yeah.
polyamory. Like a lot of these can be used interchangeably, but the reason why I feel polyamory is a subset is because, in my mind, polyamory is you have a relationship with the person that you are dating or whatever. Like it's not a stranger you're meeting on the street and going into like a sex party. Is not, to me, polyamory in my viewpoint. But being allowed to go do that would be, I'm in a relationship that allows that. To me, that would be an open relationship. Or, I'm an ethical non-monogamous. I think ethical non-monogamy and open, to me, are synonymous, because it means that I am openly, transparently, and consciously choosing with my partner to do whatever it is that we've agreed to in our partnership. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And that the polyamory is one way of doing that involves an emotional connection.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so the New York Times recently just had an article like top 5 books for polyamorous couples.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah, I mean, opening up was on there. Several other ones that, maybe 3 that you have heard you mention, and then a couple I hadn't heard of. So, it's all the rage.
Yes. Another question. I have known people in open marriages who end up leaving the relationship because it gets super complicated. Curious about how you navigate jealousy, how you make it work, and if you've seen that too.
Yes, it does get really, really complicated. Really fucking complicated. And if you're not up for that complication, think about it. I also think monogamy is complicated in lots of ways. It's a long commitment. And so it is complicated. I was very jealous in the beginning. I don't think you have to be non-jealous types of people to do this.
No, not at all.
That's not what it's about. I don't think it ever really went away. I learned to manage it. I learned to navigate it. I learned that the more love there was, the more I expanded, the more I had to give. And I think the idea of compersion, which is just a regular word, but I didn't know anything about it until we started being poly, was that the idea of compersion is watching someone else you love and finding joy in their joy. So, seeing my husband fall in love with someone else, incredibly hard. And there were moments I found eventually where I was like, oh, I'm so happy for him. Like, he's a happier person because he's going through this. And I will say I was never particularly good at it. But it was a guidepost that I constantly referred back to. It was like, oh, and that's when I became committed to his and my becoming, or his most extraordinary expression of himself and my most extraordinary expression of myself, rather than being committed to the traditional format of marriage.
And I'll throw in another term here.
Oh, yeah.
Is conscious relationships.
Yeah,
which is what I hear you're describing.
Yes.
You evolved
right.
into that, where the goal of the relationship is actual growth.
Yeah.
Growth of the individual.
Right.
And growth of the relationship, and that both are in service of each other, but not that the individual is being sacrificed. Their growth for the relationship.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good part too. Yeah. Are you saying the individual growth of one is not being sacrificed for the growth of the couple? Of the couple,
right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
Or that the relationship is not higher than the individual.
Yeah, and priority.
But that in a way you could think of it as there's 3. There's 2 individuals, and then there's the 2 of you together. That's its own entity.
Yes.
And each of them have their own growth plans.
Right. Beautiful.
And I would say that jealousy for me helped me see that I was codependent.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was jealous going into this. I was a jealous personality.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
And then we invited a woman into our relationship, and I found myself in a shower ripping my heart out because it was in so much pain, and then figured out, oh, what's that pain? Oh, that's actually what jealousy is. Thank you to More Than Two, which is a book, which helps me understand that that's the emotion I was feeling.
Yeah.
And navigating, like my dependency on how I was in the world was so dependent on my relationship and how it was functioning.
Yes. That's a great sentence too. Yeah. Even though, isn't it fascinating? Like, it is so true for me too. And yet, if you would have talked to anyone in my life, they would have been like, you have so much personality. You're so independent. You totally know what you're doing. You're so brave. Like, I really think they would have. Like, that's how I considered myself. I was not some, like, meek wife.
Agreed.
This is such a paradox.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had someone say that when I told him and I was, like, navigating codependency. He's like, you're, like, the most independent woman I know. And I was like, I know. But I'm still looking towards someone outside of me.
Yes.
To validate my experience.
Yes, that's the bottom line. And I think there are plenty of people out there who'd be like, I'm a feminist. I'm strong. But if you're still looking for someone else to validate your existence, your experience, your place in the world, and I still was in some way, for sure.
Yeah, for me too. Okay, so now leaving the poly questions and going into menopause. Any recommendations for the fatigue and insomnia during menopause, or any midlife women-ish stress?
Oh dear.
Just the whole package.
It's like just everything. What do you think? What should I do? I love these questions though. These are so They're so good. They're always so good at the Braveheart conversations. All I can tell you is, okay, my journey changed in 3 distinct places. I have tried to sum this up recently. One, when I stopped listening to my OBGYN, because, they know a lot of stuff, but they don't know a lot of stuff about menopause and perimenopause. And all they were giving me was barriers, limitations, pills, medicine, and saying no to a lot of things early on too. Like obviously hormones in the beginning. It was like, no, don't do that. There was a lot of misinformation about that. But in general, my point is that you have to go outside of traditional medicine, whether that's functional medicine or naturopath or doing your own research online or going woo or having a ceremony.
Or Chinese medicine.
Or there's so many different alternative paths now. So that's one. 2, when I started really understanding my own holistic being, all the ways I was being impacted, not just the hot flashes, not just the anxiety, not just the insomnia, but all the ways I was contributing to my own health, and not necessarily negatively, but I didn't realize what my body needed. And so this is everything. It's your lifestyle, how you sleep, where you sleep, how you eat, where you eat, the type of exercise, how you're dealing with your anxiety, if you meditate, how you're digesting your day. I think there was just too many one-offs that said, gluten is bad for you. Stop eating gluten. You need more protein. Definitely eat more protein. Did you know that magnesium is a cure-all for menopause and perimenopause? I just kept getting these little sound bites, from Instagram or from a podcast. And I'd be like, okay, I'll try that. And then I would try it, and it would work for a little while, and then it would not work anymore because I wasn't approaching it from a holistic place.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that you were trying to solve insomnia or you're trying to solve hot flashes without realizing that there probably actually was an interconnectedness between that at a deeper level. Those were symptoms of something at an underlying level.
Yes. And so I would say it's really a combination of 3 things. It's my personality, and I run anxious, and so that was impacting my sleep, my perimenopause, and then the changes in my life. You can listen to our last episode or 2 episodes ago about my Ayurvedic journey. That is what really has changed my perimenopausal life.
Thank goodness.
Yay.
Yay. Yay. Okay, Bravehearts, thank you so much as always for showing up to listen, and also to those of you who came to our conversation. And we have them every month. And we're hosting them every month. So check out permissiontobehuman.live/events to find out when our next one is.
Do you need permission to be human? You got it. Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.